the University of Texas did a study like a year and a half ago, based on law enforcement data from Texas. They said that 79,000 children, minors in Texas, are being trafficked.
On the 53rd episode of Passion in Progress, Eliminating Human Trafficking in the United States with DeliverFund, I was invited to conduct this interview in Dallas, Texas, and upon entering the headquarters of DeliverFund, I was handed this brochure. And turning to page 4, there's this title labeled, The Problem in the U.S. Let me just give you the stats that I read from that page. Every 2.5 hours, a child is taken by human traffickers. Every trafficked child is purchased for sex 5.4 times a day. 100,000 to 150,000 victims are held as commercial sex slaves, and 7 years is the average lifespan for a child victim once taken. 96% of trafficking victims are female, 50% of trafficking victims are children. Incidents of human trafficking are seen in major cities and small towns from coast to coast. The 3 biggest states for human trafficking are Florida number 3, Texas number 2, and California number 1. In this interview, I'm going to be talking to the co-founder of DeliverFund, Jeremy Mahugh, about what exactly they are doing to combat this problem in the US. If you want to learn more about DeliverFund, just go to deliverfund.org. So without further ado, let's get into the 53rd episode of Passion in Progress, Countering Human Trafficking with DeliverFund. What is up, Merc Nation? Javier Mercedes here for yet again another Passion in Progress show. And on today's show, we are here with Jeremy Mahugh, co-founder of DeliverFund, to give us some insight into this problem in the US. So do you want to give an introduction of who you are, what DeliverFund is, and take it away from there?
Yeah, so Jeremy Mayhew, co-founder in Crushing Evil is just what I call it, right? So DeliverFund is a private intelligence organization that was started specifically to equip, train, advise law enforcement to do counter human trafficking, to take down human traffickers. My background was I spent 10 years in the Navy as a Navy SEAL. That transferred over to me being able to find a job doing some contracting for a national level intelligence organization that I can't name on here, but you can guess. And then that's where it led me to meet Nick McKinley, who's our founder, CEO. And here we are today, 4 years later.
Mm-hmm. You said here we are. Literally, can you give the story of the actual place that we're in right now? This
is the redemptive story, I would say, of really turning dark to light. And Backpage.com was an internet site that looked very much like Craigslist if you looked at it, but their primary thing that they sold was escort ads. So within those escort ads, let's call it what it is, like primarily it's prostitution. But within that, there's a high level amount of human trafficking. And within that, they were also found to be complicit in selling minors for sex. So they were human trafficking minors online through these advertisements, and people would buy them and set up dates and have sex with minors, all based from the office in which we're sitting in now. Now it's been spec'd out and renovated because we had to do a cleanse, right? Mm-hmm. But that's the cool thing in this very building where they were previously complicit in selling minors for sex on the internet. Now, right behind us is a classroom where we train law enforcement to hunt down human traffickers.
What's crazy is when I first stepped into the room, they were literally in the act of doing that, which I think is really cool in looking at an organization and then seeing just like you can see the print, you can see the face of what you guys are online, but then actually being here and seeing law enforcement getting trained. And I think when I came in, you guys had actual videos of busts going on, and I was like, wow, this got real quick.
Yeah.
Can you give an idea of what year that was around when you guys took over?
It was April 14th of a year ago that the feds, along with Texas State AG's office, kicked in the doors here and seized this business. And so because everything takes a while to work out in the wash, I waited about 4 or 5 months before I hit up my real estate guy and I said, hey, here's an address. Can you tell me if there's a vacant office space in this address? And he said, I'll get back to you. Sure enough, it's actually a friend of mine. He worked for played for the Cowboys, a guy named Chad Hennings. And so Chad with Rubicon Representation got right back to me and said, yeah, you bet. It's sure enough, there's vacant space in there. And I said, well, here's why. This is why it's important. This is the story. And he said, brother, I'm in, like, let's make it happen. So we spent a few months negotiating the lease down. We moved in, I think it was the very end of February this year. We are, as a nonprofit, we're 4 years into this. Clearly we started working the issue prior to that. So, but 4 years as a 501c3, and here we are taking over the office space of Backpage, which again, DeliverFund was a primary intelligence source to not only the feds, but Homeland Security, as well as 3 state AG's offices. So it's just a really, like I said, a redemptive story.
Such a good story.
We're taking this space that was, to put it in perspective, they were making $40 million a year easily selling these ads, right? Because of that, I mean, we didn't take over the entire space, but we took over a large footprint here. So
let's get into why. Why are there organizations that are necessary, like DeliverFund? Why
is DeliverFund necessary?
Yeah.
That's a question that is kind of what plagued me from the beginning, because when Nick sat me down and said, a couple years before we started DeliverFund, he said, this is what I'm trying to do. And I said, yeah, but surely somewhere somebody's already doing that. I mean, we have the biggest government bloated on every level. We have the CIA, the NSA. We have all of these agencies, departments, organizations. There's all these nonprofits around the world. Like, surely somebody's already doing this. And he said, okay, well, you're Navy SEAL. You did this, this, and this. Did you ever work a human trafficking case? I said, no. But surely somebody is, right? Like, surely. And as we looked deep into it, we realized that nobody had brought the capability that's a repeatable, scalable model to crush this illicit market. And we've fought other illicit markets around the world, and very successfully. So why not bring those same kind of strategies, methodologies, develop them out here? We knew some of the top technology vendors that also provide to, our 3-lettered agencies. Being able to put all of those things together really allows us to get technology tools into the hands of law enforcement, who is on the front of this battle, the front edge of this battle, and allow them to be proactive. So previously, the way that this has been fought is you did have a lot of organizations that are starting to stand up. Human trafficking is kind of a new buzzword, right? You're starting to get a lot more awareness. It's starting to be in the news. People are starting to take account of it a little bit, but that's what you've had organizations that do awareness and maybe real rehabilitation, and those are important things, but they treat a symptom. Then you have, on the law enforcement side, what they were doing was they were going after sting operations, where they were going after that demand side. So they would put up a fake advertisement. You remember the show To Catch a Predator? Yeah. So they'd do something like that, where they'd put up an ad. They'd have all these purchasers or Johns, if you will. No offense to anybody named John, but I don't know where they ever came up with that name. Right? But these sex purchasers would come in, and then they would arrest them. But typically it's like a slap on the hand misdemeanor. Very rarely would their name get out, put anywhere in the news.
Do you know what those type of people would already be doing? Is there X amount of people that they were trafficking, or are they bringing X amount of money? Or
so these would be the sex purchasers.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's what law enforcement was targeting. You put up one fake ad, within like 10 minutes, you've got 200 people that respond to it.
Are you crazy?
And then you have them come to a hotel or a meeting place, and they show up and you handcuff them. And if it's for a minor, then it is a felony, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's a bigger deal, but. No traffic victims were rescued, right? No sex traffickers were arrested or put in jail. So you didn't really affect the market. Like the demand side will always be there, right? So DeliverFund falls in on that third side of the equation. And we would say that the human trafficker is the central nexus of the entire equation, because you can't have a human trafficked victim without a human trafficker. Also, when you target the human trafficker, you're going to get some of the demand side caught up in that, as well as not only the victims that trafficker currently has, but all the potential victims that they would have in the future. Not only that, But just like any business, so I've just been today talking to a bunch of people coming in and talking about business in general. And every business is looking to do what? They want to mitigate risk, right? At the end of the day, human traffickers are just business people. They are only concerned about the dollar. And so for us, it's a matter of raising the risk in their business. So we can make it so risky that it's just not worth the reward. They're going to go find something else to do. So if we are able to rescue the victims or get victims freed that they have currently, free the potential victims that they would have had, raise the risk in the system, raise the risk to those traffickers who otherwise were making $100,000 per victim per year, running 3 to 5 victims. You're talking $250,000, $500,000 a year, non-taxed with zero risk. We bring this solution and we're doing it on all these different levels. This is really what allows us to say, when properly resourced within 5 years, we can reduce human trafficking in the United States by 80%.
That's crazy. What is trafficking in the US right now for somebody that doesn't know much about it? Just how big of an epidemic is it? It's
hard because it's an illicit market. So how do you get good statistics on an illicit market, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of statistics that are out there, and I think some of them have been extrapolated from nonprofits who are trying to raise money, and so some of them even get kind of a bad rap. I would say that here in Texas, the University of Texas did a study like a year and a half ago based on law enforcement data from Texas. And they said that 79,000 children, minors in Texas are being trafficked. That's just minors, right? They said it's about 300,000 victims in general of human trafficking just in Texas. And that's based on law enforcement data. And you might also think that they might only be looking at the tip of the iceberg as well, because it's only what they can see. And again, that's where DeliverFund comes in, is we help them be more proactive and actually search out. A lot of this bought and sold online. So we're able to search out online, figure out what that demand looks like on there. Mm-hmm. But
with that, I'm assuming there's some sort of personal tie here to why you're doing what you're doing.
So when we first started this, I had an older brother that's got 2 daughters. I didn't have any kids. I was not married at the time. And my nieces were 12 and 14 years old, like right at that time when we were starting DeliverFund. And the average age of victims that come into being trafficked in the US is 12 to 14 years old. Thinking of like who they were at that age, first of all, what kind of creep wants to have sex with them? But second of all, we've got to do something to protect our kids. I mean, this is something that I have been talking more and more about, and had the opportunity to go to Congress and speak to a small group of congressmen just the other day, 3 of which actually were from Texas. And most of them really had no idea that what we're talking about is not something in Thailand or Cambodia. This is something that's happening right here in our own backyard. This is American children, U.S. citizens, being exploited by American men and women and being sold to primarily American men. So this problem that we have is we always think about this global issue, and we think about how it's Cambodia, it's Thailand, it's somewhere far away, and it's easier for us to think that that's where the problem is, so we can compartmentalize it and say, I'll send a check and you go over and deal with that. What we don't realize is, one, I mean, we realize, but those governments are super corrupt. So even the stuff that's happening over there, it's a lot of in the front door, out the back door kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's like I said, I think before, it's the American dollar and it's the American male that drives human trafficking around the world. And so why not attack that here really at the source first? And if we can do that here, it has a ripple effect globally. But changing the narrative so that people understand, like, yeah, there's a lot of debate about the wall right now. Should we have a wall? Should we not have a wall? I mean, everybody supported the wall until it became political. Then half people decided they didn't support it anymore. I don't know. Mm-hmm. No matter what your take on that is there human smuggling and human trafficking happening there? Yes. But is that like the main side of this message? Absolutely no. Like the majority of human trafficking happening in the US is, again, it's American citizens being exploited by American citizens.
Just from reading up a little bit about what you guys sent me, it sounds like when somebody does get into this system as a victim, how they keep them there is like they force feed them narcotics to keep them drugged up.
Yeah, there's all kinds of emotional hooks, manipulation, and clearly they call heroin the leash for a reason. Right? Because if you're addicted to heroin, you'll do anything. You'll do anything for that next fix. So oftentimes that's what traffickers use.
The other thing with that was like the life expectancy after they get into the system, it's like 7.4 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh.
7 years. And so, man, we've talked to victims who say it's not uncommon to be sold 6 to 20 times a day. And the other thing I would mention about that too is even those victims said, the people who were buying them had no idea that they were a human trafficking victim. They thought that they were a prostitute. So, I mean, that's one thing I'd put out there for your audience too, is like, if you think that you're just purchasing sex and you just think that it's prostitute, you might think again, because about 90% of prostitution either is currently human trafficking or at some time that girl has been trafficked. Like that girl didn't just grow up thinking I'm going to sell my body for sex. Like there's a lot of things either specifically from childhood, typically that got that person to that point. But the definition of human trafficking being based on force, fraud, or coercion. But there's all these emotional hooks, and you really have two kinds of human traffickers. You have a trafficker who we would call a Romeo pimp trafficker, operates a little bit more on like a Stockholm syndrome kind of scenario, where they, if you really love me, you do this for me. If you really love me, you'll have sex with these people, and then it just kind of expands out from there. But of course, the pimp traffickers keeping all the profits as well. And the other side is you have what we call a guerrilla pimp trafficker. And the guerrilla is clearly fear-based, right? So everything is about like, if you don't do this, like I'm going to murder you, I'm going to murder your family, things like that. And so, I mean, when you look at these girls that have a 7-year lifespan, these guys are just pure evil. And with that 7 years, they really are getting used up. And if you can imagine a girl who's 12 to 14 years old who comes into being trafficked, 7 years later, I mean, she's so young still at that point, but she's used up to the trafficker. We had a case recently where we had a girl that was on the street, on drugs, pretty much incoherent. She was doing sex acts just to survive and just to get drugs. She wasn't even of use to a trafficker at that point. The traffickers had discarded her, and it was probably just a matter of time before she OD'd herself.
Jeez. And it sounds in what you just said about they might kill the family and everything. I think in one of the references you were talking, or in one of the references, it talks about how one of the people was tricked into the situation because they were going to kill either the daughter or like something like that, where it was like another family member was quote unquote held hostage. And in that situation, it sounds like the option of even going to the police is kind of out of the question.
They're conditioned on so many levels to not talk to the police or really anybody else. And eventually at some point they even stop seeing themselves as a victim. And, oftentimes there is a child or even a family member who is leveraged for that as well. We've had cases where there was children that were involved, and the trafficker would hold the child as leverage to make typically the girl do what he wanted. Yeah.
In what you guys are doing right now, what are some of like the other questions that you get from people that are coming that may be giving you guys funds? And is there any other criticisms that you guys see from like the operation that you guys do? Is there like, what's some of the things that might hold back people from donating?
I'm always curious, like, when I'm talking to people, like what is the thing that is their reservation? Because I'm always like, if you're not part of the solution on this one, you're probably part of the problem, and maybe we should take a closer look at you. Right?
If you're not watching this online right now and just listening, even the way that he's making eye contact is like, yeah, I'm kind of scared right now.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, it's again, primarily what we do is equipping, training, and advising law enforcement. So we're filling the gap so that they can go out and do their job, because it is their job to go out and rescue victims. It is their job to arrest and prosecute and hold accountable these traffickers. So typically they're not funded to the tune in which they need to be. They are under-resourced, they are undermanned, and so we come in to fill that gap. And so I mean, as far as our audience is really twofold. One, it's because we're a nonprofit, we provide scholarships for those law enforcement officers. It's really, we have the audience of our donors, and then we have the audience of our law enforcement. And it took a while to get the full respect, I think, from law enforcement, because they've been overpromised so many times and underperformed on by so many groups and whoever. And so for us, they're skeptical at first, but I mean, we've trained enough officers now that we have mad credibility. And so I'm like, don't take my word for it. Let me give you, I don't know, how about I won't say where, but in one of the places where we've been working the longest, the last 2 years, the Homeland Security agent there was Agent of the Year, right? Mm-hmm. So our HSI guy who's Agent of the Year for the last 2 years, directly, and all he does is work human trafficking cases, points back to DeliverFund and says, the reason I got this was because of DeliverFund. And so, I mean, credibility, there you go. I mean, we're not in this to get like personal glory somehow. Like, we're in this to win the fight. And we do it as a team, and our team partners are law enforcement. So we want to make sure that we give them the tools and the training, and they can have all the credit, if they want it for those arrests, and they deserve it because they are the ones doing the work. We just provide the resources.
And then what does that look like on the other end? So say if it's somebody up in, I don't know, would you guys train somebody from like Montana, like randomly? Like, is it law enforcement from everywhere? Is it localized? How does this look like on your guys' end? Is it just in the major cities and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I don't know if you knew this, but randomly I'm actually from Montana.
Wow.
Yeah. So
yes, get it right on
the intuition is strong with this one.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm actually from Montana, and I moved to Dallas only in the last couple of years to really stand up our headquarters here and make our national headquarters, where we moved from Albuquerque, New Mexico, is where Nick was at. And I was bouncing around fundraising a lot, which I was trying to do from Montana, difficult. Moved here to Dallas, stand up our headquarters here nationally. It's a lot easier for law enforcement to come here for training, as well as, there's a major problem here. Like you said, Texas is rated number 2 in the nation for amount of human trafficking that we see going on. And so there's also a lot of capability here and resources here, but this happens everywhere. It's an epidemic that's happening in every city. I was in Atlanta and in Augusta, Georgia, a couple of days ago. And I mean, it's a huge problem in Atlanta. Atlanta has a lot of event centers. Houston does too. Dallas. Anytime there's a large sporting event. I mean, we just had the Kentucky Derby. Guarantee you, human trafficking going on at the Derby. At the Masters in Augusta, I know it. I just talked to law enforcement down there. It happens, and there's a spike in demand at all of these sporting events and larger events. Oil, gas conference, doesn't really matter, right? Anytime you have people coming into town, expendable money, cash, like there's a spike in demand. But it also happens, go back to Montana, I'm actually from a small ski resort town in Montana, and I know of 3 cases over the last couple of years there that were human trafficking cases.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So it really happens. And one of the good things about DeliverFund is some of those smaller towns especially, they don't have it in their budget to afford, these kinds of tools. But as we raise money nationally, we can say, look, we'll give you this tool, or we'll bring one of your people through training, or we'll at least like support you somehow so that they do have that support system.
What have you seen so far from you guys starting and where you're at now? Are you guys on track to what you want to accomplish? What's it all look like?
It's the thing about the name DeliverFund. Deliver is actually the biblical name for rescue, but you just got to fund it, right? so it's literally a matter of putting the resources behind it. And despite any political views of this current administration, the one thing that you can say for sure is this administration is very supportive of law enforcement, which is it's extremely necessary, because really what we do is a twofold approach. Like, we need them to be able to have the resources to do their job, but we also need to make sure that we can equip them with the resources that they need on this more proactive side. So it's really a very symbiotic relationship there. But we very much believe that we are on track, and we're doing a 3-year campaign right now, which is $18.5 million. And that's really the next phase. And then after that, in year 4, we will be in every state across the country.
Just for the listeners, because like $18 million sounds like, this is a lot of money.
Sounds like
can you explain why, like, what those resources go to?
Yeah. So, I mean, the cool thing, again, we're sitting here in this office, and this is what it's an initiative of DeliverFund. It's the ITAC. It's the International Human Trafficking Analysis Center. So it's the centralized brain for all things human trafficking. So we're pushing out intelligence reports from this space to local, state, federal law enforcement at all levels. I mean, we work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, State Department, special agents. I mean, really, like, across the board, if it's human trafficking, like, we're pushing intelligence reports on that in the U.S. across the nation. So that's a really big deal to have a central coordination of that. The second thing is the technology that falls behind that. So we have a very strong AI backed backbone technology that allows law enforcement at, again, all those different levels, whether it be local, state, federal, if they're working human trafficking cases, they can all be put onto the same channel or the same platform, if you will. So, I mean, you think about, like, again, I was just in Georgia. Georgia, I think, had 159 counties. Like, that's a ridiculous amount of counties. And every one of those counties has their own jurisdictions, and they're all very siloed. And that's just, with county, city stuff. So imagine now you have FBI, Homeland Security. All these people have their own siloed departments and agencies. So to be able to put those people on the same platform and say, I'm building a case in Atlanta, and then boom, I know it associates with a case in Phoenix or Dallas or Austin. That's not only the goal, that is where we're at. About 2 years ago, we put together those tools, and now we're just perfecting them on a daily basis. And that's one of the things we continue to do, is help some for-profit companies innovate those tools specific to our needs to fight human trafficking, but also we innovate some technologies as well. So, and we also, I mean, the currency of today is data, right? So we sit on top and own the largest and most clean data lake specific to human trafficking. So we can get that in the hands of law enforcement. And then they also are continuing to add into that. And every time they build a case, they're adding human trafficking specific data into there, whether it's phone numbers, social media accounts, I mean, all of those pieces. And so that's all of those things together are what help us reach that goal of 80% reduction in 5 years.
And it sounds like that needs some money in order to keep that infrastructure in place. Is there any other examples that you can give for the audience of just obviously not giving too much detail, but of wins, of like what you guys are doing is working? Recently,
about a year ago, I guess it was, for me, and primarily I do fundraising, right? But somebody hits me up on LinkedIn and says, hey, I've heard a lot of good stuff about DeliverFund. They said, do you do victim services? And I said, well, here we go down this, I'm like, technically we don't really do victim services. For the most part, we equip, train, advise law enforcement. What exactly is it that you need? They said, well, we have a girl who we had worked with previously doing some victim services, and this lady was in New York City. She said this girl's in Tulsa. She's been re-trafficked. She fell in with some bad crowd, got re-trafficked. Her trafficker has her somewhere between Tulsa and she thinks she's headed towards Dallas. This is like 10 o'clock at night. And I respond to it. I'm like, okay, send me the details. That's exactly what I'm like, hold the phone. That's exactly what we do. Like, it's not really like victim services so much, but that's exactly what we do. I mean, we come from the counterterrorism background. We have prior NSA, even FBI, FBI terrorist watch listers. I mean, we know how to find people and do it quick. Not only that, but like we're tracking all these advertisements of where these traffickers are trying to sell their product. So within 18 hours, we were able to have 3 of our targeters independently verify where this girl was. Homeland Security made the arrest within 18 hours, right? Like this just doesn't happen in law enforcement. It's not law enforcement's fault. It's just they don't have the tools. So within 18 hours, they were able to get the warrants, get arrest. It ended up being not one, but 2 traffickers and 4 victims, right? Mm-hmm. And then that had a spin out case within the next 24 hours in Kansas City. There was an additional, I think, 3 or 4 traffickers
that was linked to
that, and another like 4 or 5 victims, right?
This gets exactly to the point that you're talking about of a whole globe. You have a whole infrastructure.
And so like some of the best investigators in the U.S. with all the best tools, they've gone around and looked at other cities, see what other people are doing. And they're like, okay, like we think we're doing as best as we possibly can. It was taking them on the short cycle, the short end, 21 days to build a human trafficking case.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, because it's a process and you've got to go through all the stuff. So what we're doing here in this classroom, the technology that we're bringing, the methodology, this target-centric methodology, all of the technology platform with the database, all of this is taking that down to amount of hours. Like the case I just told you where it was 18 hours and we had identified them. They were able to make those arrests, get warrants, all of that. So that's really important. If you are a sex traffic victim and you are being sold in one city, and by the time law enforcement typically was able to get a warrant and to come and try and get to you, you're already in another city, right? And it just starts over and over. So we are giving that capability for law enforcement to be proactive and get ahead of it.
And it sounds like because of the database that you have, they're able to make those, and I'm assuming here, but they're able to make those arrests because there's already a case built against whoever they're arresting.
Yeah, for sure. So to give one more example about like how important this training is right here, when we were running this in New Mexico, we had an officer from Santa Barbara. And so they were building a case and they said, they're just learning the tools in class. At the time it was a 10-day class and they're like on day 4 and they're like learning the tools and they're like, I've got this case built because he's building a case in his own jurisdiction. And we said, cool. Yeah. Get a warrant, right?
Yeah.
You're the cop. Like, what's your next step? He did. He goes back to his hotel room, drops a warrant. And the next day, the sheriff's department goes and arrests this guy in Santa Barbara. And the girl that he was selling had just turned 18. Well, the thing about that is, so she's no longer a minor. So if you're a minor, you're not legally old enough to make the choice to be a prostitute, right? Mm-hmm. So it's automatic human trafficking case. Whereas if you're not a minor, then they have to like prove it, and so it's a little bit more difficult. So with her, they're like, okay, well, she just turned 18. However, we have all the historical data that he'd been selling her over the past year. So boom, slam dunk, human trafficking case. Way easier to prosecute. Not only that, but the sheriff said, this is like having all of your homework done before you go and even make an arrest. And that is also the reason why the cases that we've been involved with, we have 100% conviction rate.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Would you be able to know how many, like in a year or something, just like some round number?
I wish that we had a little bit better insight into that. Like, I would say in the past few years, we've we've been associated with probably more than 100 cases of with traffickers.
Can you explain why it's hard to gauge that though?
Yeah, for example, like if we give a case that is that has a minor in it to, say, the FBI, legally the FBI cannot report back to us on that case. Like we might see it pop up in the news, but sometimes it's a long process for that to happen. Plus, we're only 4 years old. One of the first cases that we did, this guy, it was a horrible case. But bottom line of it was he got arrested and convicted, but it took almost a year for him to get sentenced, right? So I mean, like the legal process is long and drawn out. Plus, there's certain privacy laws that we're a for-profit company. We have really good relationships with a lot of law enforcement where they do pass information back and forth with us, but sometimes we don't even know about it. And ultimately, what we're doing here is we're making disciples. We're teaching these guys how to go fish and go out and plant their own units that are doing good work. And it may be like 2 years later, and we hear about like, hey, they made like 30 arrests. Like that's awesome. We didn't even know about that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they like to send us like the news link and be like, hey, check out this guy we got.
Yeah.
And that's good. But and then we also work some of those cases where they sometimes reach back to us for help. And on the advised side, we help build cases wherever they need help. But that's it's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly how many victims there are as well, because you don't necessarily have all those victims like being held at one time in the same place. And so, I mean, it's just it's not super straight line math.
Yeah. And it sounds a lot like there's a butterfly effect there. Like say you took down one person, but that person may have had a whole infrastructure or network of wherever, and then you don't even know like the end number of people that you have saved in the long run.
One of the things that I was trying to point out is like, one, you raise the risk in the market, which makes bad guys think about going to do some other kind of bad activity, because now if they do this, they're going to get caught and held accountable. So maybe go back to selling guns or drugs. Great. Mm-hmm. We have agencies for that. You also are getting the potential victims that trafficker would have freed, right? So while they may only have 3 victims today, maybe they had 10 in the past 10 years, right? Or over X amount of time, they had so many victims that they've owned literally as slaves. But also in the future, left unchecked, they would continue to do that, right? And like I said, if the lifespan's 7 years, I mean, they're just going to continue to roll in new product and use it up and then discard it. So you're literally fixing a problem that is having an impact that does have that ripple effect into not just the victims that you see that day, but potential victims that they would see, and the other traffickers around that say, I'm not going to do this either because I'm going to get caught and held accountable. So you raise that risk to all those potential victims of all those potential traffickers. You know what I mean? Like it's a huge ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. So where are you guys at right now in terms of raising fund? And it sounds like you were 4 years in?
Yep, we're 4 years in. We just started this campaign recently basically in January. And so here we are 4 months or so down the road. We've raised $1.6 or $1.7 million towards that campaign. Yeah, so we've got about $17 million to go.
Yeah, and you was it 7 years that you wanted to do it in?
So this is it's fairly aggressive. I mean, for being as young as we are, but we are doing that campaign is for 3 years. It's 2019, 20, and 21 is what it funds, and then the $18.5 million funds those 3 years. With all the programs that we do as we continue to scale up. We're trying by the end of this year to actually have commitments on that. So we're getting a lot of people that will make commitments on like, hey, I'll do X amount for each year. And so I think we're on the hook to do, I think we're going to be pretty close by the end of this year.
Awesome.
Yeah. So,
and you said scale up. So what does that look like? Do you want to have something like this facility in a bunch of cities? Do you want to have people have the opportunity to fly in and get the training and go out and do their thing?
So this is the central headquarters where people come in to give the training. We do some flyaway courses where we go and take our instructors and go train people in other areas, other cities as well. But primarily they come here, and it's a fairly expensive process, and the technology has its cost. But I think, we don't necessarily need buildings in every city, but we eventually will need a small team of people there who are really interfacing with that local law enforcement. But primarily, it's our biggest costs are in training and equipping law enforcement. Beyond that, having this centralized headquarters here that's just pushing intelligence out to those law enforcement around the country is really where it is. So as we scale that, there's the concept is kind of like in the world of terrorism, instead of chasing these bad guys around from country to country, city to city, you cast a net, right? And so it's actually called net methodology, and you can just make a phone call and say, hey, we're tracking this guy, but he's coming to you, and then he's coming to you. And so in 3 years from now, the goal is that we're working in every state, and really into that year 4, we have law enforcement at all levels in every state that we can say, hey, you've got this guy that's coming from Austin and he's coming to Phoenix, and this is who he's got with him, and this is the whole package. And so no matter where they go, the net is cast.
I love it because you already gave an example of how it works, and it did work.
Absolutely.
For anybody that is listening, what else would you want to say just to, I guess, invite them? Where can people find what you guys are doing? Do you accept donations online? How does that look?
We're at DeliverFund.org, right? That's our website. You can go on there to make donations. On social media, we're at DeliverFund on pretty much everything. You can find me, Jeremy. It's usually Jeremy.Mayhew at whatever. I don't really run all my own social media. So if you respond to me in something, it might take me a long time to respond back, but
it sounds like you're doing more important work.
Yeah. Right. So, but yeah, I mean, definitely people can email in. I think it's info@deliverfund.org. They can go on the website. They can inquire there. They can make donations there. Definitely encourage people to follow us on social media. We're at that in this past 12 months. We've gotten a lot better at telling our story and getting it out there because we have a social media director who's awesome, and she's really pushing that out. And so you can keep track of that. You can also sign up on our website for our newsletter. And we also put out what we call Kevlar for kids. So if you're a parent and you want to protect your kids and see what kind of apps and different things are out there, you need to kind of keep an eye on, watch out, security restrictions, all those different things. We're getting better at putting out that information, that content. So definitely sign up for that newsletter, and it comes out monthly via email. Then quarterly, we usually send it out in the USPS.
That does, the Kevlar for Kids makes me wonder, is what should parents look out for to avoid any kind of situation like this?
It happens where abduction is happening. Like the traffickers have gotten much more emboldened because the dollars are so great and the risk has been so low. So yes, I think that kids are being abducted and that is going up, but mostly the way it's been is kids are getting lured in somehow. So I think, if you're a father, it's really important that you have a good relationship, especially if you have a daughter, and just like that girl needs to know that she is loved. And she also needs to be taught that there's evil in the world. There's bad people out there that are going to do bad things. And so she can call BS if somebody starts to develop this relationship. And the other thing that I always try and say is tell your kids and then have, their friends need to be educated as well, because if you're that adolescent who is being targeted, it's very hard for you to see that you're being targeted, but your friends will, and they'll tell, a parent, they'll tell somebody like, hey, this isn't right. So, I mean, there's a level of education and just letting kids know that there's stranger danger or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't on your social media, like, don't just have open settings. Don't just accept anybody that wants to be your friend on social media and can follow your status of where you're at. Like, oh, we're at the park on Sunday for a birthday party with all of my little girlfriends. Like, those kinds of things just need to be more on lockdown, and they really need to keep a tight rein on who their friends are on social media. We even had a example recently where I won't say the name of the company, but it was a gaming system that pretty major one, and a boy was playing these games, and a man had started to develop a relationship, because on these gaming systems today,
have a chat.
You can have an open chat, but you can on all these other apps and everything else too. So anything that has like this ability to have open chat, you really got to be careful. Like, who are your kids talking to? And in this case, the kid was over a multi-month period. This guy had built this relationship with him, and then say, hey, I'm going to come visit you. And then eventually did, from another state, came in and said, hey, I'm just down the road, come out your house, meet me. I'm 2 blocks down. Boy does it. Boy jumps in the car. Trafficker hucks his cell phone out the window, and they're gone. And so, luckily, the parents had the passcodes to the cell phone. So law enforcement was able to get the cell phone and unlock it and we actually participated in this case to help figure out where he was. So within about 24 hours, we were able to identify where he was. He was already in another state, and we were able to catch up to the trafficker and get this boy rescued and
I'm
free.
Really glad this had a little bit of a good ending. I was like, I didn't know where that was going, I was like, wow, this is going to be really bad.
and to end on a happy note, right? Like, the cool thing about what we have here is we have a scalable, repeatable solution, and we're bringing hope to these victims. It's a very dark, tragic issue, right? We hashtag crushing evil because it literally is evil, and we're going after it every day. We have amazing analysts and targeters, and we're crushing it, but they're bringing hope to those victims, and at the same time getting these a-holes put in jail. So
one more time, how can people get involved?
I think that people really need to start paying attention to the news. It seems like a lot of times when I talk to people, they're like, oh man, I never even thought about human trafficking until you spoke here, you talked about it. And then ever since, like, it seemed like I hear it everywhere. Well, start to take notice, because there is a lot of things in the news, in the media. There's a lot of stories. You can put it in your Google alerts, right? And human trafficking, you're going to start to see all these stories. And a lot of them are US based that you're seeing there. So educate yourself, especially if you're a parent. Educate yourself. Start to figure out where you can fit into whether it's helping to get better legislation and better laws on the books, hold people accountable, lobbying for things, whether it's donating to your favorite charity, which hopefully is DeliverFund, or whether it's volunteering to go out and help these victims somehow. It's really a holistic approach that we need to take, and just start to get educated on it. Again, you can follow our social media, and we'll put out things on there as well as things come up.
Well, thank you so much for your time and enlightening both myself and anybody listening / viewing this podcast. If you would like to share out this podcast with a friend and also enlighten them on counter human trafficking, you can tag me at Javier Mercedes X. And if you also enjoyed this, you can leave me a review on iTunes. I really hope that you guys check into, at least visit your guys' website to get some more information on this. And just from the little bit that I saw, some of the statistics, I was like, this is really staggering. And I didn't, just like you were saying, I didn't know that it was such a big thing. And then you start to catch notice of all of this stuff that is actually out there. Hashtag crushing evil.
Boom.
Thank you guys so much. Until next episode, live a life of abundance.